The simmering tensions between Israel and Iran erupted into open conflict on June 13, 2025, a date now etched into the region's volatile history. In a meticulously planned surprise attack codenamed Operation Rising Lion, the Israeli military launched a series of precision strikes against key Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. The operation was not merely a preemptive measure. It was a targeted decapitation strike aimed at crippling Iran's offensive capabilities and leadership. The Israeli Air Force struck deep inside Iran, hitting missile storage facilities, sophisticated air defense systems, critical radar installations, and the command and control centers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran itself. This was a clear message of intent, designed to degrade Iran's ability to project power across the Middle East. The impact of the Israeli strikes was immediate and significant, both in terms of material damage and human cost. Among the casualties were senior Iranian military officials, including Saeed Izzadi, a key Quds Force coordinator for Hamas who was linked to the October 7th attacks, and Behnam Shahriari, who headed the Quds Force's weapons transfer unit. The strikes demonstrated a profound intelligence success for Israel, penetrating deep into the IRGC's secretive hierarchy. In a move that also carried symbolic weight, Israeli forces targeted Tehran's notorious Evin prison, a site infamous for holding political prisoners and activists, signaling a multifaceted assault on the Iranian regime's instruments of control. Iran's response was swift and furious, but it also revealed the strain of the initial Israeli assault. Under the banner of Operation True Promise 3, Iran unleashed a massive retaliatory barrage aimed at the heart of Israel. Over the following days, a staggering number of more than 1,000 drones and over 450 missiles were launched toward Israeli population centers. On June 13, an initial salvo of approximately 150 ballistic missiles targeted major cities, including the bustling coastal metropolises of Haifa and Tel Aviv. While Israel's multi-layered air defense systems, including the Iron Dome and David's Sling, intercepted a majority of the incoming threats, the sheer volume of the attack ensured that some projectiles broke through, causing injuries and significant damage to civilian infrastructure. The missile war marked a terrifying new phase in the long-running shadow conflict. For nearly 2 weeks, the skies over Israel were a battleground. Sirens wailed constantly, and citizens sought refuge in bomb shelters as the relentless attacks continued. A particularly devastating barrage on June 23 saw around 30 missiles strike various locations, injuring at least 20 people and hospitalizing 11. Despite Israel's claims that it had successfully eliminated over half of Iran's mobile ballistic missile capabilities since the conflict began, the ongoing attacks demonstrated Tehran's grim determination to inflict a painful price, turning the 12-day period into a harrowing ordeal for civilians on both sides. The conflict took a dramatic and decisive turn on June 21, 2025, when the United States abandoned its defensive posture and entered the fray directly. In a high-stakes military operation named Midnight Hammer, American forces executed a massive offensive strike aimed at the crown jewels of Iran's nuclear program. The operation involved an impressive display of U.S. air and sea power, with 6 B-2 stealth bombers, escorted by F-22 fighters, penetrating Iranian airspace. For the first time in operational history, these bombers deployed 30,000-pound GBU-57A/B bunker buster bombs, officially known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, to destroy Iran's most heavily fortified underground nuclear sites. The primary targets of Operation Midnight Hammer were Iran's key nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Fordow facility, buried deep beneath a mountain, was hit with 6 of the colossal MOPs, an overwhelming show of force designed to ensure its complete destruction. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy submarines operating in the region fired 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles, adding another layer to the coordinated assault on Natanz and Isfahan. This intervention, closely coordinated between U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, fundamentally altered the strategic landscape, shifting the conflict from a regional confrontation to a direct military clash between Washington and Tehran. Following the strikes, President Trump made a characteristically bold declaration to the world, stating that Iran's nuclear plants had been completely and fully obliterated. His statement was intended to project strength and finality, bringing an end to decades of international anxiety over Iran's nuclear ambitions. However, international observers, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, urged caution. While the IAEA reported no immediate increase in off-site radiation levels, it stressed that a full, independent assessment of the damage was impossible without access to the sites. The true extent to which Iran's enrichment capabilities were neutralized remains a subject of intense debate and intelligence analysis. Iran's leadership, though battered, was not silenced. In a calculated act of defiance, Tehran launched a retaliatory strike against a major U.S. military installation in the region. 6 ballistic missiles were fired at the sprawling Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, which serves as a central hub for American military operations in the Middle East. Most of the missiles were intercepted by U.S. and Qatari air defenses, and there were no reported casualties. President Trump publicly downplayed the incident, thanking Tehran for providing early notice of what he dismissed as a very weak response. Nevertheless, the attack on a U.S. base marked a dangerous escalation, proving that Iran was willing to directly target American forces. On June 23, after 12 days of intense and escalating warfare, a glimmer of hope emerged. President Trump announced that a complete and total ceasefire had been brokered through the diplomatic channels of Qatar. He triumphantly branded the conflict the 12-day war, framing the cessation of hostilities as a decisive victory achieved through overwhelming force. The phased ceasefire was intended to halt all military actions, including missile launches and airstrikes, and allow for a de-escalation of tensions that had pushed the region to the brink of a full-scale conflagration. For a brief moment, the world held its breath, hoping the announcement would bring a definitive end to the violence. However, the peace was shattered almost as soon as it was declared. Within mere hours of the ceasefire taking effect, the fragile truce collapsed amid a storm of mutual accusations. The Israeli government publicly accused Iran of breaching the agreement by launching another volley of missiles toward its territory. Iran's officials vehemently denied the charge, claiming it was a pretext for further Israeli aggression. The rapid breakdown of the agreement underscored the profound lack of trust between the adversaries and the immense difficulty of enforcing any diplomatic resolution when both sides remained on a war footing, ready to resume combat at a moment's notice. The alleged violation prompted an immediate and harsh response from Israel. Acting on the accusation of a ceasefire breach, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered a renewal of military operations against Iran. Israeli warplanes were once again scrambled, this time conducting a follow-up strike on the already battered Fordow nuclear facility. This move signaled that Israel was unwilling to tolerate any perceived defiance from Tehran, and was prepared to continue its military campaign to ensure its strategic objectives were met. The renewed fighting plunged the region back into a state of high alert, dashing any hopes for a quick and stable resolution. The cycle of attack and counterattack left the ceasefire in tatters, a casualty of the deep-seated animosity that diplomacy could not overcome. The brief pause in fighting served only to highlight the precariousness of the situation. The swift return to hostilities demonstrated that the core issues driving the conflict remained unresolved. Neither side appeared willing to back down, and the so-called 12-day war seemed poised to reignite with even greater intensity. The failure of the ceasefire left the international community watching in alarm, as the path toward a wider, more destructive regional war appeared more likely than ever. As the dust from the initial conflict settles, the world is left grappling with a dangerously unstable new reality. The primary risk remains the unresolved nuclear question. While the United States claims to have obliterated Iran's key facilities, the full extent of the damage is unknown. In response to the attacks, Iran's parliament has already approved a plan to suspend all cooperation with the IAEA, effectively ending international oversight and deepening suspicions about its nuclear intentions. The fear now is that a cornered and vengeful Iran might accelerate a clandestine weapons program, making the region and the world far more dangerous than before the conflict began. The threat of further military escalation looms large over the entire Middle East. An advisor to Iran's supreme leader has publicly called for retaliatory strikes against U.S. Navy ships and for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil supplies. Iran's armed forces chief has vowed that the American strikes will not go unanswered, suggesting that proxy forces like Hamas and the Houthis could be activated to attack U.S. and Israeli interests. The United States, having shifted from a defensive to an offensive role, now faces the challenge of deterring further Iranian aggression without being drawn into an open-ended war, a dilemma that has prompted sharp debate within the U.S. Congress. The economic and political fallout has been immediate and global. Oil prices have fluctuated wildly on world markets, reacting to every threat and rumor emerging from the region. The European Union has warned that any attempt by Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz would be an extremely dangerous move with catastrophic consequences for the global economy. Politically, the conflict has deepened international divisions. The United States and United Kingdom have stood by the strikes, while allies like Germany and France have expressed grave concern. Meanwhile, Russia and China have condemned the intervention as an act of unprovoked aggression, further straining geopolitical alignments. In conclusion, the 12-day war has not resolved the conflict between Israel, Iran, and the United States. It has merely redefined its terms on a more perilous stage. The situation is alarming for nations worldwide because it combines the immediate threat of a wider war, the long-term danger of nuclear proliferation, and the certainty of global economic disruption. The world now watches anxiously, wondering if the next phase will be a descent into a larger regional catastrophe, or a step back toward a fragile, tense, and uncertain peace. The path forward is fraught with risk, and a single miscalculation could have devastating consequences for all.